All right, let's jump on the RAF Tempest. We haven't done the edited content on this particular project just yet, and that is a Corsair, my friend. That is not a Tempest. But what it is, though, is a reference book. And we start the aircraft series off, particularly with the Tempest, on the live streams, and we spent a lot of time going through reference material, books, opening these things up, magazines, all sorts of various publication work to kind of just get our feet grounded in the conversation of what we want to be doing with aircraft, in particular with OPR weathering of aircraft. And I kind of set forward a simplistic process of painting and diving right into the weathering. But we need to be grounded in this conversation, even though we're talking about flying things that are not grounded. You know, pulling over this 1/72nd scale Academy Tempest was just purely a demo model, proof of concept. Just let's show you guys how this works. Combine it with your references and, you know, set forward a game plan that is something that you can execute. And what I find, if you're going to lean on OPR, in particular, if you're really going to commit to this program, you're going to realize quite quickly that all this heavy airbrush work that has come into vogue in the last couple of years, particularly for aircraft modeling, it's doing double duty and relatively unnecessary. So you're gonna lean a little bit more on an efficient spraying process, get the colors down to where you're happy with the surface, and then you can dive right into oil paints for the weathering. And you can that's pretty much a straightforward process. You saw me do this with the P61 video earlier. You've seen it on all the armor projects. It's pretty much my approach to scale modeling today. I try to be as efficient as possible. A lot of people brag about how fast things are, how in time, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the truth is, the sooner you put the airbrush down, the faster you get the model done. And that's kind of one of those we don't really talk about in the hobby too much. You know, especially the male-dominated side of life, where we just feel like using our tools is the way to go. I'm going to argue that a bit, in particular with color theory, you know, using the various colors underneath your camouflage. You know, what a black will do to a sky gray, what a gray primer will do for your RAF Sky, and how that will look when you're done. You know, you see me talk about this with the IDF Super Churchill project. You saw me discuss this recently with the RSO and with the various camo schemes over decades of use of a German camo followed by a red civilian camo and color scheme, etc. So working with your colors in an efficient manner to me is more important than spraying hours and hours and hours with the airbrush, especially if you're going to commit to OPR. And that's the purpose of these videos, is to train you into the fact if you're going to commit to it, then commit to it. And understand that wholeheartedly. It's designed to be efficient. It's designed to be powerful. It is created to be a reliable, simple technique to employ for any project, any scale, any color scheme. In this case, British Desert What If on a Tempest. But the reality is that oil palette right there on the screen is used for 90% of the projects that I do. You know, I've got some tans, some whites, some grays, some grease and grime tones, some warm tones. And in this particular case, I needed some light pale blues and greens for the underneath color. And it's as simple as that. You know, there really is nothing more that I need to be doing with this outside of just studying the references. And that's the correlation here of what we're really trying to do. Pull open your books, check out the material. And it doesn't have to be a Tempest per se. You know, in this case, you know, you could be doing this on a Spitfire or a Hurricane, you know, Beaufighters, etc. Even the Lancaster. I mean, it's really the reality of subject matter is related to each other, to your kits, to your build, to the paint colors you use. And then as you walk into the references, one of the things that's really critical with this conversation, one of the separations between this and the armor stuff in particular is robots fall into this too a little bit. Flat surface weathering is unique. It's a little bit different because there's not a lot of details that are raised up, or you don't have a turret or a gun or an engine deck the way you do on a tank to weather up on it. So flat surface weathering, i.e. aircraft weathering in this particular case, it's a little bit different approach. And what I'm trying to do here is teach you guys that work with the colors you have, develop a relationship here. And what I'm talking about in the video or in the live stream at this point in time is that sky tone is my middle tone. And when you sit down to do OPR, light to dark, you have a lighter tone of the sky, you have the mid-tone, which is the actual airbrush color, and then you have a darker tone of the sky, which also comes from the oil palette. So you have a triple layer that you work with. It's quite simple to kind of maneuver. If you need to fade, you go with lighter tones. If you need grease, grime, dirt, etc., you go with a little bit darker tones. You keep it super simple. Don't reinvent the wheel. And the last part of that really allows us to hit home in an efficient manner is work panel by panel. There's no need to do the whole wing right now. You're not going to do anything other than slop chemicals all over the surface, which is a more classic way to do things, but it's also less efficient, and it's also less accurate. So that combination, while on the surface might look quick, down, and dirty, there's a whole reason it's called a sludge wash. The problem with that is that's not what happens on real aircraft. And you need to be in more control of that. Well, how do you achieve that? You're looking at it. OPR is going to allow you the tool and the technique to gain control back of the model and to weather it how it should be in terms of what you're seeing in the reference photos. And that's a real critical element, especially if you want to take this to competition level. The world around the hobby is changing. If you're not improving your realism game, if you're not upping your weathering in terms of a weathered competition model, you're going to fall behind. And if you're leaning on practices of 1990s, 1980s, or even older, or some of these practices have been around a long, long time, and they're not designed to be realistic. They're designed to just slap the stuff down to get something resembling a weathered aircraft. Well, that's not the capabilities we have today. We're far more advanced as a hobby. And OPR brings that to the table. The whole reason I developed OPR was because I was stuck in that 80s and 90s practice of slapping stuff down. It didn't matter if it was MIGs and ammo washes or not. It's just that's the context of fill the panel lines up with the dark color. It's just not what really happens, even though that's what I'm doing at this moment in time. But I'm in control of my fades, my tints, my weather. A lot of you guys are leaning on this with the airbrush. Well, I focus all this effort, all that pre-shading effort is all done in OPR. There's no need for me to do double duty with my airbrush when I'm going to walk through this process with a paintbrush. Second to that is what this application system is, light to dark, controlled opacity, panel by panel, is you get far more interesting and realistic panel lines from this type of work. And I've said this before with aircraft. The manufacturers put us in a corner. These little trenches all over the surface are something we have to deal with. And the other way to deal with that is kind of slapping the wash down and wiping it off. Well, that works in a few scenarios, to be truthful. It's not a be-all, end-all. However, the hobby has embraced it as, and that's unfortunate because what you're missing is that correlation between what is it really doing, what is really happening, what is that aircraft actually going through? Is it Navy, ground-based? What's its usage? Is it World War II, World War I, Vietnam, Iraq? All these things matter. They make a difference to the colors. They make a difference to how the paint is affected. Makes a difference to, everything that's going on. The maintenance, how intense is the maintenance? Is under duress, et cetera, et cetera. Are they low on ammo? All these conversations make a difference at the end of the day. So oil paint rendering provides you that technique tool to perform that at a very efficient level. You're looking at 15, 20 minutes worth of work here on screen. So quite quickly, you can see what your weathered subject matter is going to look like. Why is that important? Well, we have life. Life gets in the way. So we can't sit there and do this to completion every single session, right? Well, we need a technique that allows us to step away and then come back to the model, and you can see what you've done. It's your histogram of everything that you're going to do on this project. I have solved on that left wing there, or the underside of the starboard wing, is all the weathering conversation I need to be concerned about, more or less, 90% of it. I know exactly what this model is going to look like. I know what colors I need to use. It's all on the OPR palette, and it's all sitting right there in the model in front of me. So when I step away, then I can come back in and have this model is set to this point of just, okay, now I know exactly what's going to go on for the future, couple hours worth of work that I need to do session by session to get this model to completion. At times, I think some of you guys confuse this with a lot of work, and it's not. If you really break down the time spent, whether airbrushing heavily and all this other stuff that has to go involved with that, with the cleanup and in the airbrush paint conversation, versus sitting down with your colors on the model and doing this kind of work, what you get from this, those panels, all that you see on screen right there, are going to be fully weathered out. That's a really powerful conversation to have, and you hear me talk about this with some of the other armor projects too. By being able to do it this way, you can see the varieties of tones I can get between my panel lines. Again, this is a really basic, simple Academy 72nd scale aircraft kit. It's not the best in surface detail. It does really nice job, you know, whatever, but it's not a superb kit, modern state-of-the-art kit. This is a pretty old kit by our standards today. But you can see with just some airbrush work there, and we step back and review, that little bit of work right there, we're done. All we have to do now is color by numbers and execute the game plan. Use the references to kind of build up, you know, more intense areas, you know, say around the gear, engine, etc., you know, the ammo bays, all that kind of main stuff. That's easy to kind of figure out and move along as we go forward. But you've got faded panels for different materials between the control surfaces and the main panels of the aircraft, etc., etc. All that done with the oil paint, very simply, very easily. You saw it on the P61 video. You're going to see it on the Tempest here. The light color is really helpful because it does kind of explain it really easily in terms of visuals. You know, you guys can kind of see that. You don't really need to hear me. You can just kind of watch that. But understand the power that's in front of you here with this kind of technique. Those of you that have started to embrace this more and more and more, and OPR is now kind of a popular term, but just understand where I developed it from. Understand the purpose of it, that I wanted that power of control to mimic the references. That was a very, very important part of this process because it elevates the game of what we're trying to do. And our next stages here on this, and you can see some previous work there on the top side I was doing as kind of a practice piece. We're going to repaint this in the desert scheme that you saw later on, so stay tuned for that. This is kind of an intro part of that, kind of warms you guys up a little bit as we dive into this kind of what if desert Tempest, which I think would be a really cool project, by the way, in a much larger scale with a much better kit. So that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this first part 1 of RAF Tempest in North Africa, and then we're going to move on to painting some camo, doing some more OPR, etc., etc. So stay tuned. Thank you guys for your support.